We are always usually uncomfortable with silence. It can be discomforting in some cultures more than it can be in the others. And while it's good to realize that silence can be interpreted differently, it can also be used as a powerful negotiation tool. Silence can not only help you sink in the information or read a body language, but it can also help you de-escalate an already heated situation. So if used effectively, silence can actually be quite a powerful tool. And this idea was a lot prevalent back in 1980s when negotiation looked more like a dominant approach, more like my negotiating partner must fail for me to win. It was more like we are at odds with each other, right? And this negotiation mindset still prevails. There has been a lot of research done where people still have the same mindset of the dominant approach. And experienced negotiators still find themselves in situations where they are looking for a win-lose situation. I must win for the other person to must lose. And this is called the power of default. We are so attuned with this power of competitiveness, competitive nature, that we carry it in everyday's life, be it our personal life, be it our professional life, and even at the negotiating table. We fail to understand, though, that there is a default behavior we have, which is being empathetic. But apparently, we find ourselves at odds with this behavior when we are negotiating with the other party, because we want to win, which is always in our mindset. So what is negotiation really? At an intellectual level, negotiation is an appealing idea. It is to convince the other person to find the best way to accept a mutually acceptable solution. And everybody then gets their fair share, which is never the case really, because again, it goes back to our power of default that we really like to win. This is what our understanding of negotiations always is. And negotiations does not usually begin at the negotiating table. It starts way before that. Oh, the slides definitely. This is the power of default that I was talking about, the approach we have usually, which is more like I need to make sure that the other person doesn't get their share, which is more like a zero-sum game, like I have to win for the other person to fail. And because it exists even today, we see that in our regular day-to-day life as well. For you to be successful, you have to find a balance between the science and art of negotiation. Science of being focused at your ultimate goals, and art of managing people's expectations with different egos, with different measure of success, very skillfully. And as I was talking about earlier, the negotiation does not begin really when you're at the table. It begins way before that. It begins even before you meet the other party. And it begins by knowing your goals, by understanding what you want, by knowing your walkaways, by understanding your strategies. It starts with planning, with the right planning. Most of us often think we have a good idea of what we want and a pretty decent idea of what the other person may want. So we go in the negotiations hardly putting in any efforts about improving my own walkaway strategies, and we most certainly do not spend time thinking about the other person's walkaway strategy. In my opinion, we cannot negotiate if we do not know in the beginning of the negotiation where we strategically want to be at the end of the negotiation. And it's not always about knowing what to do or understanding what to do. It's also about knowing how to implement the strategies with so many variables floating around. If you think about a business example for Akira Morita, Sony Corporation CEO back in 1950s or 60s, I believe, he wanted to have a deal with a US-based company called Bulova, and he wanted to sell 100,000 Sony transistors. So while he was in this deal, the negotiation unfolded, and he was provided with an offer. Bulova provided the offer for Akira to sell 100,000 transistors to them. They would put their tag name and sell it all across the US. So Akira went back to his board of directors and said, what should I do? Like, what's your opinion, right? They were quite excited, and they told Akira, better make sure you do the deal. It's really exciting. And naturally so, because it was 3 times more than the working capital of Sony at the time. And Sony was not really a very well-recognized brand name outside Japan. But Bulova had a great retail distribution network system. So Akira thought about it, took a few weeks, went back, and declined the offer. Now, do we know why did Akira decline the offer even when he had the confirmation from his board? Rightly so, because going in the negotiations, his goal was clear. He wanted to position Sony for its branding and not necessarily increase the profits of the organization. He knew what he wanted before he went in the negotiations, and so he was able to manage the discussion and the flexibility that came around and the challenges that came around opposing his board of directors as well. Not every negotiation will result in a signed deal. And not every signed deal is an outcome of a successful negotiation. It is better to walk away than accept a deal which is below than everybody's walkaway point. Or in other words, as the industry term goes, BATNA, best alternative to negotiated agreement. Having a no deal is a sign of a success as long as your end goal is not being compromised. And when we are at the negotiating table, we want to be in the strongest position possible because we want to win, right? And so the more information you have about the other party, the more stronger your position will be, because information is power in negotiations. So what kind of information you should be looking for? Try to understand the other party's facts. Information about the company, long-term goals, short-term goals, their interest, their position, their underlying interest, what they want and why they want it. What is their position versus what is their interest? You see, interest are these underlying factors that make people behave in a certain fashion when you're at the negotiating table, and which is also very similar in our personal relationships. So people behave differently because everybody's why is different. If you think about salary negotiations as an example, when we think about salary, we think about compensation, which is usually our position most of the time. But it may not be a position for somebody else in this room. Somebody may value flexibility over compensation. Some people may value recognition over compensation. So a why is very important, not just for the organization, but even for the individuals that you're negotiating with. The other type of information that I found to be very helpful is the strategic information. Try to understand the other person's behavior, action, past results, anything that can help you understand their thought process. So what do I mean by that? I learned a lesson early in my career when the importance of a strategic information when I was negotiating with a telecom company to negotiate a deal for across global locations. And I was in this room where the other side of the party had a gentleman who was coming across to be quite intimidating. For every one concession, opinion, or an option that me or my team provided, the gentleman came back with 2 arguments. For every one opinion, he came back with 2 arguments. It almost always felt the individual did not want the deal to go through. And so this happened about an hour in the meeting, and then he stood up, he threw his papers in the briefcase, and he walked away. He literally stood up, threw the papers in his briefcase, gave a good stare to one of his team members, and walked away. Now the person he gave the stare to, he looked at me and he said, "I can try and explain this to you, but it would go over your head." Now, I had few things I could have done at the time. I could have responded with an equally rude comment, or I could have walked out of the room just like the gentleman did, or I could have been silent. What do you think I did?
Silent.
Well, yes, I was silent for a bit. Then I stood up, I looked at what I was wearing at the time, and I said, "Now that I'm standing up, it may not go over my head. So please try and explain a little bit." So see, I used humor to diffuse the situation. And I could do so only because a night before, I ended up talking to a coworker who had negotiated with this gentleman in the past couple deals. And he tells me he's a classic example of somebody who would use walking away as a tactic. He would intimidate you, He would come across very arrogant, he would walk away, but he would be the same person to come back on the table 90% of the time, within 24 hours, to negotiate again with you. Now, did that information help me in any way? Absolutely. Begin to imagine what my reaction would have been if I did not know this critical piece of information, because it helped me prepare my strategy in advance. It helped me not to take things personally, and it really helped me to create a differentiation between why I'm really there. It's not about me, it's about the business. And it really helped me use humor to diffuse the situation. You see, it's important to understand the information about the other party, what they want, why they want it, what are their objectives, why are they even here. But it's also important for you to revise your own their priorities is based on wrong assumptions. It is important for you to abandon your plan and go to your alternate strategy. And you could only do so if you would prepare well in advance, if you would know what you're looking for, and you would take it more objectively than anything else. So now when we know what we want, we know our goals, we have the right set of information, and we are really empowered to do the deal. I'm going to make it a success. We also need to realize there is no trust in the relationship. Most often, when negotiators go at the negotiating table, they face two types of dilemmas. A dilemma of trust. How much can I really trust this person? I've never negotiated with them before. I don't even know them. And second is the dilemma of honesty. How much can I be honest about my own interest? And should I be? I've never really worked with them before, right? For mutual gains, you have to be able to build trust and share information. If you don't share information, you would not be sharing everything you know about them. But you have to share some information for them to understand what your boundaries are and what their boundaries are. One of my clients once had to create a deal team to negotiate with a US-based company. And he had a local negotiator in the US. The individual was very skilled, very talented, but he also had the inability to be flexible, because of which the deal was really stalling. So then they called me to be the lead negotiator. So I go to States, I meet the team, and it was made that now every discussion to the negotiation should route through me to our clients. But the individual continued to bypass me, continued to work with the client. And I just was not able to understand what is driving this person's behavior. Why is he not collaborating with me? We are on the same team here. And so, you see, there are stakeholders within your organization that you need to get alignment with before you go in the negotiation. Because at that time, it was clear to the US company that there is this internal disalignment which needed to be sorted out. There was no focus, really, because we were struggling for power battle. Who will go and have this negotiation with the client? And it also occurred to me that I had not really spent time to invest in this relationship. I didn't really spend time knowing about this local negotiator. And only when I started investing, I realized there is a misunderstanding that could have derailed the entire negotiation process. I learned that the individual, there were commissions riding out of the outcome of the meeting. So he was behaving more personally versus more objectively. And only then I was able to spend some time with him for the next couple days and make him understand that I have nothing to do with the commission. I'm really here to expand the piece of the pie and get more benefits for the organization. I wasn't there for commission like he was. And only when he understood that importance and when he had the same objective as he is, he was able to partner up with me. And he was able to maintain the focus we needed and sustain the credibility with our client. which is very crucial, because I've seen a lot of negotiations derail just because there is lack of alignment. Everybody internally has different measures, motives for which they go on the negotiating table. Sometimes there are side deals happening which you're not even aware of. So for you to know that, you need to know what you're getting into and try to build that trust with the other person to gain that alignment. Your ability to negotiate with people means you have to be able to understand what is important to them at a fundamental level. Not what you think is important to them, not what you want to be important to them, but what is really important to them at the fundamental level. And only when you know that, you will be able to understand where you stand with them and how far along would you go in this negotiation discussion with them, or how far along would you go getting the alignment with them. Because no matter how much efforts you put in, at the end of the day, you're dealing with people, human interaction. No matter what you're negotiating, where you're negotiating, what is even your medium of negotiation, it's mostly about human interaction, which is still harder to understand sometimes, but it is about human interaction. Now, when we negotiate with the other party, we should always think about creating value. Now see, most of us has underlying interest that needs to be met. And so if the package you invent meet the objective for both the parties, it makes sense to do a deal. But there may be situations where it does not make sense to do a deal. Maybe you're not in it for the long term. And it could be situations where you're buying a cup of cappuccino from Starbucks in the morning, or buying a used product from a flea market. You're not looking to create any value out of it, or a longer term relationship. But that is not usually the case in negotiations, especially business negotiations. Value can, should, and is created in business negotiations. I was once negotiating for an insurance company with commercial clients for home improvement organization to buy carpets. It was to be used for talking about price per yard. And I was pushing for volumes to get the pricing down, and the other seller was pushing for how good the quality of the carpet is to justify the price to me. So we kept talking about things like just-in-time inventory, contract terms, payment terms, and all enchilada of the things you should be talking about. But quite honestly, the value was not really being created. So I decided, how about I go back to the preparation I did, which was really important, and I looked at the options of creating value beyond the obvious ones. And it occurred to me that the insurance company at the time, we were looking to buy specific set of consumer database from a data management company. And the home improvement firm had that information. Now, think about this. To them, it was no cost because they already had the data. But to my organization, the value was immense. We were already working on negotiating with some other company, but I figured that if we combine both of them, we could actually probably expand the piece of the pie and create more value. So the next time I met the sellers, I kept the price per yard discussion at bay, and we started talking about if there is an opportunity for us to create value. Would you sell the data to us? Or would you marry both the consumer databases? Are you even open for revenue opportunities? Are you even open to recognize if there are any other opportunities beyond what we are discussing right now? And rightly so they were. So we were able to combine both consumer databases, and they were able to leverage it to create consumer marketing programs. So we were not able to just close the deal with a price that benefited both, but we were also able to expand the piece of the pie. And they ended up creating more revenue opportunities, and we ended up saving dollars with respect to having gone to the data management firm, and also was able to get the pricing for our carpets. So the value was created. And it's not always easy to do so, because when you're at the negotiating table, cooperation usually becomes competition. And there is no way around it, really. As long as you understand that your goal, it's nothing personal, and your goal is about making both the businesses meet their objective, you can actually create value. But what if you're trying and the other party is not really into creating value, or they don't understand that it needs to be created? What would you really do? At that time, Ask questions. Ask what-if questions. Ask more questions than you want to know the answers of. Prepare in advance how you would ask the questions, because the way you position your questions can change the outcome of a response. And then listen to them carefully. It's very important to also listen carefully. How many times have we been in negotiations and we realize, you know what, the other person has not really answered some of the things I asked? It's important to know what they are saying and what they are not saying. It's important to know what they are avoiding to respond to. And this becomes even more critical when you end up meeting an irrational partner. Because quite honestly, at that time, the negotiation entire discourse goes out of the window. Because then you have this one person who would risk everything, but to make sure you don't succeed. But usually, when you're listening carefully, when you're reading the body language, when you're looking at the verbal cues, you can create value in negotiations. And the next one is actually the point I love the most. It's created by Chris Voss, one of the writers, power of no. Now, no is the word we usually avoid. We avoided the word when we were kids, when misbehaving. We avoided the word when we were teenagers. And we also took this word into our business careers. How many of us here has ever gone back to their boss and said, nope, I have not met the objective? Or no, I have not done the goals you have asked me to do. No is the word we usually avoid. But no is a very powerful word in negotiation. Experienced negotiators probe for no, push for no. They want to hear no in the beginning of the negotiation. And why? Because it helps you create boundaries. It helps you understand where you stand with the other party. It helps you understand how far will they go in this negotiation. It helps you understand whether or not they would budge on the pricing, or what are some of the areas where you could actually create value. No is a powerful word, and I believe using no effectively, like silence, can actually help you with effective negotiations outcomes. Sitting at the negotiating table and negotiating effectively are two different things. It's like a sports person going in the field with just showing up, and a sports person going in the field with an intention to play. And if you have the right framework, if you have the right goals, you know what you want, if you have the right level of information, if you go with an intention of creating value, and you do share information for building trust, you can create value. Because at the heart of every negotiation is a conflict that needs to be resolved. You can either go with a negative mindset, which will make negotiations way more harder, or you can approach it with curiosity. You can ask questions, share information, and try to bring them to that zone of agreement where you can create value. And then every negotiation would be different. So in my opinion, never give up. I hope this will help you in negotiations.
That was great, and this has been acknowledged. There's lots of questions coming in. I wanted to ask you first, though, dealing with multinationals, it becomes kind of cross-cultural. But what happens when you are, let's say you are dealing with a Southeast Asian country, you're dealing with a local conglomerate, and you're now faced across people who are used to building longer relationships and for whom you can't react in the way that you do. What do you do as you begin that negotiation? Because obviously before you get to know each other.
So if I understand your question correctly, if there are different individuals that are involved in a negotiation party based in different locations, how would you deal with them?
Yes.
Great question, because this is usually our reality now, these days, right? When you talk about the individuals in different locations, They could mean internal individuals that you have to work with, or they could mean external individuals that you have to negotiate with. External parties, you also negotiate these days with global organizations, so people are based out of all locations. Cultural aspect plays a bigger role, because everybody, as I said, silence can be interpreted differently in different cultures, and so can the understanding of the information sharing. So can the understanding of even, let's say, being personal. There are different individuals who behave differently in different situations. Before you go in the negotiations, you need to understand their culture, where they are coming from, what is their understanding, do they have the internal alignment, do they look at the goals together like the way you look at the goals? Is it aligned towards a same goal, or are there different set of objectives being achieved? You have to put in efforts there. You have to leverage your network. You have to leverage a lot of the information gathering that I was talking about in the beginning to not just know about their cultures, but their own perspective, but also know where they're coming from. Their past experiences could also drive a lot of the outcomes which is on the table. Yeah. There could be some internal politics or dynamics happening that you're not aware of when you're at the negotiating table, because you're not in that country, and people behave differently in different ways. And hence, you need to understand, at least from that mindset, where the other person's perspective is. So you can at least gauge. And again, ask questions. The more questions you ask, the more you would know about the other party or their interest. Yeah. Sometimes people try to get into negotiation because of not they want a contract with you, but maybe because they're leveraging the information they receive from you for a deal to be done somewhere else. And the more questions you ask, you would know whether or not they are being collaborative or not. And that's actually called false context pretense in negotiations, which is not difficult. It's not easy to understand sometimes, because you could never tell, but it comes with experience.
Well, certainly with experience, you notice, why would you ask that question except to go negotiate somewhere else? Does anybody have one from the floor? We do have quite a few online, but is that a hand? No, it's a chin scratch, my mistake. Okay, here's a fairly straightforward one, but I guess not. Gender bias in negotiation. Do you see this at the multinational levels? And if so, how to deal with it?
I do. Mm-hmm. And I've experienced that as well. It's another type of discussion altogether, but quite honestly, if you do the right level of practice in advance, and if you know who you're dealing with, you can actually come over that. If you're clear about your goals, and if you understand where you're heading, and if you have the right trust from your stakeholders, it's helpful. Because when you're at the negotiating table, it doesn't matter who you're negotiating with, be it a man or a woman. If you know your goal, and if you know the individual's past reactions and behaviors, you can be flexible in your approach to negotiations. So it's important for you to understand where you would want to be at the end, and be okay to walk out. I've seen negotiators sometimes get obsessed with, I have to make the deal. You don't have to make the deal. Having a no deal is okay, and there is no pressure, but you have to have that internal trust and alignment before you can make that decision.
Yeah, excellent. So there's a lot of digital tools that are now starting to proliferate to help. Oh, we have one from the audience. I was going to ask about digital tools, but I'll go to you instead.
I'm going to ask the same question.
Perfect. Please introduce yourself.
Mark Fowler. I work for a biotechnology company called Autolus. I'm just interested. All this makes sense. Great talk. Thank you very much. Over the last couple of years, when we've all been virtual, using Teams and stuff, are there any top tips for negotiating over Teams, or when you can't be face-to-face?
Yeah, great question. We have been experiencing this for the past 2 years now, or even before that. In my opinion, there is still a long way for us to go to achieve the same success virtually as we achieve when we meet the other person face-to-face. Most often, we don't understand whether our decisions or our communication, what we are communicating to the other person virtually, is even getting through them. There are no verbal cues or signs or body language that you can read. You cannot have an eye contact, really, virtually. But there are certain things that you could do. Try and check in with them regularly. Try and reframe the questions. Try and paraphrase what they said. Have that touch point defined so you can understand whether the messaging is going through. Don't multitask. People figure out if you're multitasking. Look straight into the camera so they know that you're looking at them and you're interested. There may be so many situations or different circumstances happening around them. Also keep in mind, whatever the individual sees in the camera around you speaks about you. So be very careful of your surroundings as well. Everything has a cue. Everything has a messaging into it. And at the same time, I would also suggest have a process in place. Regular processes, when I say process, structured negotiation really. What would you be talking about? Like at least a high level structure so it doesn't go off route. You know what you would be talking about, and then keep expanding the piece of the pie as you go along and keep reframing what you're hearing. So then you're both at the same page. And when the discussion is over, send an email summarizing what you spoke about, because people interpret things differently. So it's always better to have that alignment rather than not have it at all. Hope that answered the question.
That's right. And people also forget, if you don't send an email within an hour, we forgot what we agreed and then we have to go agree again.
I forgot what I ate in my breakfast today, so.
Me too. Sort of thing. So digital tools for effective negotiations. These are coming out. They sound, honestly, sometimes like an excuse for someone who doesn't want to have to sit in front of someone they need to negotiate with. Do you think the tools that are on the market now, that are coming on the market, are worth companies using, and are there risks associated with them as well?
Well, there is not one tool that would be helpful or successful. Different tools serve different purposes. And again, it would never replace an in-person conversation that you have. Yeah. So pick up your negotiation style or the relationship you have with the other person. Pick up a tool that would work the most. And yes, there are risks for using the tools. The risks are more so in terms of the connection that we're talking about, irrespective of the tool you use. You need to build a relationship. Just because you're negotiating virtually does not take away the fact that you need to do the proper homework or need to build a relationship. Because again, at the end of the day, you're talking to people. It's about human interactions. And no matter what tool you use, whatever medium you use, if you're not getting your messaging across, it won't work.
Excellent. We have time for one more from the audience, if anybody would like to ask. Excellent. Down the front. Please introduce yourself.
So my name is Andrew. I work for Ocado as a supply chain finance manager.
Excellent.
One thing we're trying to do at Ocado is to move, from a finance function perspective, is move away from being a transactions function to being a true commercial support function for our procurement teams. So I was part of procurement, and the question I'm always posing to my procurement colleagues is how can commercial finance, how can support functions in the business support negotiators get the best deals? And it would be good to get your experience of how you've used support functions to support with negotiating deals for your clients.
Internal alignment, the point that I picked up, that includes working with the support functions internally. In my experience, it always helped to have as many strategy sessions as possible with all the support functions before you go into negotiation. The support functions play a different role in the organization. They come with a different mindset. They come with different experience. And in negotiation, all kind of experience help, because you never know where the direction would go when you are at the negotiating table. Hearing from a salesperson versus a marketing person versus a finance individual versus somebody who is in acquisition, in my opinion, it has always helped me, because it has always helped me understand how far along can I go. And finance obviously plays a big role working with procurement. We need to understand our cost levers. We need to understand where can I push or where can I not push for my cost to go up or down. Because yes, it is about creating value, but it is also about the best benefit for both the organization. And everything boils down to really then the cost and the delivery and the relationships you have. So the support functions can definitely help negotiators, providing their viewpoint, because you see finance stance probably at a much higher level than a negotiator would see at the time. And it's important for them to understand where the organization is negotiating, but overall to be able to go up and down the cost levers that they can.
Thank you.
Deepti, that was excellent. I have to let everybody go for lunch. We'll be resuming at 2 p.m., but thank you so much.
Thank you.